Big time fight coming up this weekend at light heavyweight. We have Danilo Marques taking on Kennedy and Nzechukwu. And Matt, I say big time because these are two of the bigger fighters that you're ever going to find at light heavyweight. For Danilo Marques, 6'6". For Kennedy and Nzechukwu, coming in at 6'5". And for Nzechukwu, he's one of those guys that if you go back and you watch the overall body of work, and this is my criticism before the Carlos Ulberg fight, he's never used his distance and his length to his advantage. You look at the fight over Dennis Bryant, where, again, the commentary team, can he throw kicks? Yes, he can throw kicks. But you go and watch that. Didn't have the killer instinct. He had him hurt. And then he just kind of waited for the referee to end the fight. You got to go in there and finish it. Then he makes his UFC debut. He fights Paul Craig. He gets finished. Again,
Paul Craig submits everybody.
A couple of guys that don't have a good read on Paul Craig and how good he could be. But Paul Craig, that one's tricky. He fights Darko Stosic, and Matt, points were taken away in that fight. Darko decided he liked to make some kicks to the cup. And then for Kennedy, he fights Carlos Ulberg. And it's like, all right, everything, all the game planning, it's all in the right place. Saif Saud has a great spot for him. He's got things figured out. We're going to go into this fight. We're going to pick up a really big win over the city kickboxing guy. It was UFC 259. You had Ulberg. You had Shane Young. You had Israel Adesanya. Listen, the place was buzzing about the city kickboxers. And listen, not that long ago, we had a similar card. Adesanya was on the card. Brad Riddell was there. But again, you look at that card, and it was really, really tricky. Now, did I make a mistake? Did I say that, hey, we had Shane Young on that card? Yeah, I did. Was he on there? No, he wasn't. But when you look at that one, it was tricky, right? Because in the first round, Carlos Ulberg looked pretty good.
He couldn't miss.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, his cardio fell off a cliff. His hands started to fall, and credit where it's due. Kennedy was still in the fight. He took the hardest shots, and then he started to land some of his own, and he finished the fight. And that finishing sequence was amazing. And Kennedy and Nzechukwu flew. He soared like a phoenix. I could not be happier for the guy. That was a huge win. His second in a row in the UFC. And he seemed really displeased with the way that he got the win over Darko Stosic. So again, the sportsmanship was there. But the win over Carlos Ulberg, it's like, all right, Kennedy and Nzechukwu, the stumble out of the gates against Paul Craig, now it can be forgotten. He's taking on Danilo Marques, who's a guy that, Matt, I think we had the worst read on this guy coming into the UFC. The level of competition coming in was absolutely abhorrent. Awful. I mean, he fought Clayton Catano back in 2018, who was 5-4. He beat Marcin Polmano, who was 0-16 before that. He lost to Myron Dennis, that was 13-6. He beat Junior Lorenzo, who was 5-9. He lost to Marcio Tellez, who was 6-6. And he had the longest time off between fights. And again, he came into the UFC and I thought, this guy, I get it. He's great at King's MMA. He's a great guy to replicate other fighters in the gym. He probably works out quite a bit with Fabricio Verdum. We're going to get a neat look. And then he fought Hadis Ibrahimov and he looked good. And then he fought Mike Rodriguez and he looked really good. So for Danilo Marques, I'm kind of on the train. He was originally supposed to take on Ed Herman in this fight, which would have been kind of a neat matchup. I would have been there for that.
Fight Night favorite.
That would have been a great one. Love the Ed Herman fights. But now it's interesting because Nzechukwu's fought the grappler before and he lost that fight. Danilo Marques is a guy that even watching regional fights in Brazil, I saw him corner in a fight that had Luana Pinheiro. Like, this guy's really interesting. He's a jack of all trades.
So the question really comes down to, could a 41-year-old Shogun Rua beat Danilo Marques?
I don't know.
Probably not, maybe. I'm just trying to gauge where the Paul Craig grappling is in all of this. Because for Danilo Marques, it's weird. He's 35. He's huge for the weight class. You would think he's done progressing in his career, but I do feel like we have seen an improved fighter, at least his last two fights out. The fighter who was in there against Mike Rodriguez not only emphasized the submission, but just won pretty much every minute of that fight. And listen, I know Slow Mike's not the most eye-popping talent out there, but he's a decent fighter. Like, yeah, right? He's a decent fighter. And I do think that was a really quality win for Danilo Marques. My question mark really comes into, how good can Kennedy and Nzechukwu get in that one training camp since his last fight? Because in his last fight, he just showed that he was tough and had good cardio. And listen, I think that can take you very, very far, especially at the light heavyweight and heavyweight divisions where the skills aren't normally as good as they are down at light heavyweight down at welterweight and lightweight. But for me, I think Kennedy's also in that band. He's only 29 years old. And at light heavyweight, that is so young, you have no idea. That's why I always get excited when you have guys who are like 27, 28, 29 in that light heavyweight range, because you know they're going to be fighting the top fighters in that division for years and years and years to come, and you're going to be able to see their skills develop. My whole point, I guess, they're trying to get to is that Kennedy Nzechukwu, every time out there, has gotten better. And I do think that we are seeing an improved version of him every time out. And one thing I do really like, you bring up the size that both these guys have. I like the cardio out of Kennedy as well. He's a really big guy who does move very well for the weight class. I do kind of like him a little bit to Ben Rothwell. Not, again, this submission game, not so much, but I will say there are two big guys who move exceptionally well for just what their physiques look like. I'm extremely excited for this fight, although I will admit it is very odd that it is so high up on the card.
Yeah, it is a really tricky one, and if you look at it for Kennedy Nzechukwu, again, he is a southpaw, he's got 83 inches of reach, something that you love to see, especially in the division. He's going to have a big gap there when it's compared to Danilo Marques, so can Marques kind of bridge the gap? Is he able to get the takedown? Is he able to get the submission? Listen, before even giving out the odds and the topology predictions, I think so. He's a guy that really takes guys down in unorthodox and odd ways. He has really nice trips. If I do look at the odds, this opened as a pick'em. So both guys at a minus 115. Marques, a slight underdog, minus 101. For Kennedy Nzechukwu, he's right now a minus 122. Over on Topology, 70% of the fans, 869 total votes, have Nzechukwu to get the win. 79% by knockout for the 30% that are Marques. 58% by submission. And again, I've had weird reads on these two guys in the UFC, but I have oddly liked what I've seen out of Marques in those last two fights. Now, I have to preface it by saying, or really finish it, punctuate it by saying, Hadis Ibrahimov had an awful UFC run. Like, terrible.
Yeah.
Like, Zalim Imadiev, Hadis Ibrahimov, I went, yes, these guys are going to be great, and they were terrible. Good win for Marques. Slow Mike, this is another fight where we get to see where both of these guys are at. You don't go and get a win in this fight and then end up in a fight against like a Magomed Ankalaev. You still have a while to build your way up. You probably don't even get a top 15 fighter with a win right here unless you have an amazing win and a great call out. But for me, I like Danilo Marques in this one. What are you thinking?
I can't disagree with the thing you just said, but I am ever so slightly going to pick Kennedy in this fight. I do think that if he can defend some of those early takedown attempts, he has the slightly better cardio out of these two fighters. And if he can keep this fight on the feet, which is a very hard ask to do, because like you said, Marques has very unorthodox trips and takedowns that he does like to go to. So Kennedy's going to have to watch his P's and Q's and really make sure that, hey, you got to keep this fight in the center of the cage or all the way up against the cage and not let him take your back. Because that's really what I see. Like, Marques isn't a guy who's really going to waste minutes on the ground. He's going to try to pass positions and go for the submission very early. So if you're a guy like Kennedy, you really got to make sure that you're not taken down with like 4 minutes left in the round. If you're taken down, do it with like a minute left in the round, and hopefully you can work your way back up to your feet, or at least not give Marques enough time to submit you. So with all that being said, ever so slightly going to pick Kennedy in this fight.
Not going with Kennedy and Nzechukwu to get the win. I'm going with Danilo Marques. I can't wait for this one. Let us know down below in the comments section who you're going with in this fight. Matt, we have two big fights left. You're not going to want to miss them. Both of them at heavyweight. Bozer, OSP. You've got Cyril Gane taking on Alexander Volkov. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it.